Thank you for joining us. Today we should be in the Town Hall in Cheltenham at the Gloucester Business Show, but for various reasons it's been cancelled. And that now takes place in November on the 18th and 19th. So we've replaced that virtual event, sorry, that real event with this virtual event, where we're going to look at the Golden Valley development in Cheltenham, and is it a golden opportunity to modernise construction? For those of you who don't know, the Golden Valley development is right on the edge of Cheltenham, near GCHQ, and it's going to be a world-leading centre with a cyber, but also commercial property and 3,000 houses. There's something like 2 million square feet of commercial property. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but it's big. And just the infrastructure for the road going in is going to cost 22 million. So it gives you an idea of the scale of the project. And it also, we put Cheltenham on the map, and we just mentioned the M5 just now before we started. It's right next to that link. So we thought it was a good idea to use that as a vehicle to look at construction and what would that be like during that project. But this also applies to any construction project, really, about how we modernise. It also links quite closely to the construction recovery plan that's just been launched. So what we're going to do, we're going to talk about digital adoption in construction. We're going to talk about methods of construction, modern method of construction, so prefabricated flying factories and those types of things. Zero carbon, but carbon and waste during the construction phase, but also the buildings as we go forward. And then we'll look at the skills we need to develop a modern construction sector. And just good, perfect timing, because Andrew's just joined us. So welcome, Andrew.
Hello. I'm sorry I'm slightly late. You knew I'd come straight from another.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. And it's nice to see you on the other side of a panel. You're normally doing this bit, and it's nice to see you as somebody taking part. So I think we ought to start with some introductions, introduce the panel. All the panel members wear more than one hat, some of them two, some of them three. So we're going to start, we'll start with Jane Hall, please.
Hi there. My background is I used to work for the Environment Agency, and followed by that I was environmental consultant. I've recently set up my own business, Green Edge Applications. We produce our own digital tools to support environmental projects and also concerns, and we also provide consultancy to support other digital organisations to help them develop their tools as well. We produce online training, and we're gradually developing a portfolio of our own training, which will be available through the website soon.
Thank you. Saffron?
Yeah, so I've got several different hats on as well. We've got a construction training company called Setting Out for Construction, a consultancy and training company called Digital Construction Skills, and up until our funding was suspended, we were given funding by CITB to roll out the digital leadership through the digital transformation through leaders project. Currently keeping me busy, we've been given funding by Innovate UK to develop a resilience assessment platform for SMEs, aimed at SMEs in particular. So it'd be good to talk to Jim Stevenson at another point about that. I'm on the industry leadership group in Scotland for skills and training, and I also chair the future skills subgroup of the industry leadership group. And I'm also involved in the Scottish Civils Training Group, which is similar to the training group that Gerald runs in Gloucestershire.
Thank you. And a recently published author?
Yes, slip that one in, yes. Setting Out for Construction, a practical guide to site surveying.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vance?
Well, I suppose I'm a local, so I work with Gerald and with the Gloucestershire Training Group. I'm also a member of the CIOB hub in Bristol. And I'm presently a deputy chair for the Hereford and Gloucester Training Group. I've got a few other titles, but I won't share them with you. Mainly revolving about my day-to-day job being a small builder in the Cheltenham area. I suppose I think Gerald recruited on the CIOB line, but in essence, I'd like to think that my area of interest is smaller contractors.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be pleased with a small contractor, not that small, but a smaller contractor represented. And Andrew.
Yes, good morning everyone. Andrew Carpenter. My daytime job, if you like, is Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association. So I look after the UK structural timber frame systems sector, incorporating timber frames, CLT, SIPs and so on. We are at the moment at the heart of the MMC debate, particularly around embodied carbon sustainability, because more and more people seem to be moving towards timber as a building material of choice for those reasons. So that keeps me busy. But I've also been involved with the Constructing Excellence agenda since the Egan Report of 1998. And I'm currently the Chief Executive of Constructing Excellence in the Southwest and also in the Midlands. So that keeps me very busy. I was until a month ago also chair of something called BIM for Housing, which has been a very interesting group of people to try and get digital technology embedded in the housing sector, which is a bit like plaiting fog. Yeah, that's probably enough from me, Gerald, at the moment. I've got other hats, but that's probably enough.
Thank you. I have two hats. I have my own business called G Acceleration, and I also, as Vance mentioned, run the Gloucestershire Construction Training Group. So I'm going to start with digital. So we're going to in Cheltenham have this wonderful cyber park, you know, world-beating, world-leading, and the use of technology. And from the plans that have been published, it's going to be a real centre of excellence. And so it made me think that the companies all organising the construction of that project, how digital are they, and how digital should they be? And I think we've got two distinct groups. We've got the main contractors who perhaps are moving towards a digital future, and then we've got the SMEs who aren't as developed in the use of technology for all sorts of reasons. It'd be interesting to get Vance's view in a moment. But I thought we'd start with the headline things of, and Andrew mentioned BIM and housing. I never thought those two went together, but what's your views about the future of digital? Are we going to see digital twins and blockchain and AI and BIM? What's the future likely to be in construction? If Vance and Andrew just disappeared.
I'm still here.
Oh, you're there. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah.
There you go, Andrew. You're back.
Yeah. I mean, if you want me to answer first, my view that it's inevitable that this is going to have to take place, because as generations come through and join the sector, it's a digital age in which they've been brought up. It's a digital age that they're familiar with. And we have to provide a sector that is right for them in terms of what they're used to and how they operate. Because if we don't do that, then they'll leave the construction sector and go elsewhere. So I believe it's got to happen. The problem we have is that we haven't yet espoused the business benefits to enough people to get them to embrace digital technologies. And that, I think, is something that, as I say, in the housing sector in particular was prevalent. So it's getting the business benefits, but it's also getting the clients to insist on BIM and digital technologies and so on, because it's got to be driven from the clients. I think we're good at the stick in construction, but not so good at the carrot. Yeah,
good. And you mentioned the benefits, and we did a survey as the training group. It was only a small survey, but 100% said they found it difficult to evaluate the benefits of technology. Safra, what about the SME market and their use of digital and your experience of trying to encourage them to take things on board?
I think there's a few different angles you can look at it, Gerald. I agree with Andrew that that there is, you know, the client needs to drive it and almost facilitate it. But I think there's it's got to be an onus on business owners and leaders that if they don't understand something, it makes sense. If you're the leader of a business, it's your job to find out about it in the name of keeping your business alive. Because Andrew is right, it is inevitable. What might happen is the divide's going to get greater, and the ones who don't embrace it won't be able to compete, and the ones who do embrace it, you know, they'll flourish. So there does need to be the drive from the client, you know, who stands to benefit. But the other way I've been looking at it more and more recently is that it's not just the client or the contractor or who's directly involved that stands to benefit, but every single person in this country is a stakeholder in the construction industry, and we don't see it that way. We don't think, you know, everyone would weigh in on the debate if it was something about the NHS or the education system, but when it comes to construction, it's like a separate thing. But you know, the digital, you know, digitalising the construction industry would save taxpayers money. It would improve diversity. It's going to, you know, create so many job opportunities. So I think it's not just one answer. There's so many different prongs to this.
Gerard, can I come in again? Because I've just, the webinar I've just left was with Bays. And we may be seeing a change of direction from a government point of view in terms of how construction is viewed. Because I was told in that previous webinar that actually government are acknowledging that as a sector, we are seen as the leading sector in terms of how we've dealt with COVID-19. So coming out of COVID-19, we're being held up as best practice. And there is an acknowledgement by government that in terms of getting us out of the pickle we're in terms of the, you know, the recession that is inevitable, that it's the construction industry that's going to be seen as the main driver for recovery. And I don't know whether you're aware of the roadmap to recovery that was issued last week. That's what we were discussing. So I'm an optimist, but I do think that there is a change in terms of perception, and I do think that construction will be seen more positively going forward for those reasons.
Yeah, and I think things like we you know, you can imagine even 6 months ago saying we're going to do this meeting by Zoom. Whom we would have said, you know, would Vance have said yes? You know, probably not. So I think there is a real change. We've got a real catalyst for change, I think.
Yeah, and the example that the government are using and acknowledging, having seen it, is the way that we've built the Nightingale hospitals up and down the UK. You know, so they know it can be done. Of course, the question will be now, well, if you can build those hospitals that quickly, why can't you do everything else?
Yeah, I can see that coming. Vance, from a smaller contractor's point of view, where do you see digital? Is it understanding the benefits? Is it the cost of implementation? Is it that you know you've had 20, 30, 40, even 50 years of using, you know, Excel and, you know, and telephones and everything else, that there's no real appetite? What not just from your company's point of view, but perhaps your colleagues from CIOB, why do we see this lag of not adopting it?
I think a lot of the comments that have been made during the brief meeting we've had to date, the elements that you all bring to it are all fine, and I think that in reality most smaller contractors, there's not a real resistance. I think if you talk to most smaller contractors, you know, and you'd said to them, right, 3 months ago, you know, do you use click and collect, it's Screwfix? They'd say no. But because of the need and the demand as a result of the COVID outbreak, they're immediately using things that they wouldn't necessarily have used before. So picking up on Andrew's comment about the stick and the carrot, you know, in a way, most smaller contractors, you might think there's a resistance, but actually there isn't. They just need to see the benefit. So that comes back to the comments that you made about the survey you did about people struggling to see what the benefits might be. And, you know, speaking, you know, in a fairly anecdotal way, the contractors that I know well and the ones of my extended sort of network, for want of a better description, are all bright people. And if they see advantage, they will grasp it. There's just not a problem. there's almost a problem with the term digital, because what does it mean? So if we were to take a straw poll today, we got 8 people on this call, we'd probably give you a different answer. So when we talk about digital, they almost freeze because they think you're talking about BIM. And then they start thinking, does BIM mean something different to what Andrew might be thinking? The reality of life is that given the opportunities, given a reasonably upbeat industry, which may or may not exist in the next few months, they'll be open-minded. I really think they'll embrace any form of technology that allows them to do their job in an easier way. But they do need their hands holding.
I think that's, isn't it, you don't know what you don't know syndrome almost. I've just been privileged to be a judge for the Constructing Excellence Southwest Awards. And one of the categories I was asked to judge was digital. And there's a company in Bristol called HBXL that have been doing digital technologies for about 20 years for small builders. And that's looking at estimating health and safety, project planning, etc., etc. And actually judging what they're producing for SME contractors is phenomenal. And I think any SME contractor that actually gets to see this would want to use it. The problem is they're a small company and they're doing great stuff, but how do they communicate and market what they're doing?
Well, they've been quite expansive in their marketing.
Have they?
Yeah, I've been aware of them for some time.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I thought what I judged was excellent without giving too much away.
No. I would subscribe to your thinking.
Just going to shut the window. I've got some tree felling going on outside.
Yeah. Jane, what's your observations? Because it's interesting how much digital you have in your business.
I have worked quite a lot with local authorities in particular on digital and given a few presentations trying to break down those barriers that you're talking about. And there's definitely a sort of reaction of eye rolling as soon as you mention any digital buzzwords. I think that we've all sort of evolved with certain digital products perhaps painting a bad picture of other ones. We've all worked with a frustrating IT system that's difficult to embed and doesn't always do what it does, but what it's supposed to do. So I think there are reasons for the eye rolling and the fear, but there's also no good reasons not to trust future developments and to give that a go as well. So my sort of involvement was to try and explain what some of the terms that are being bandied around are. I mean, things like blockchain and so on. And to try and break down some of those barriers by making people realise that actually digital isn't necessarily new. You're doing the same thing, but just ideally in a more efficient environment, or in a slightly different way, or you're logging and recording things in order to have some computer program learned patterns so that you can improve the way that you work, rather than it actually being a massive radical change because of being on some program. So for me, it was more about breaking down those barriers and helping people to understand that it wasn't necessarily a digital revolution, but rather just an evolution, and bringing those products in to help people do what they already do and make it easier. And generally, if there's no benefit and if it isn't a good product, then it's not going to survive, but just to not tarnish all digital things with that sort of brush and to give things a chance. That's the sort of thing that I've been faced with doing what I do. The environmental sector and waste as well are very reticent to bring on new technologies. And we often find that we're doing the same thing over and over again, which could be readily made more efficient by some sort of computer program or digital tool. And they're the sorts of things that I'm looking at, making it easier to find things, making searches more readily accessible rather than Google trolls, that sort of thing. And that was what led us to build My Waste app, which is a tool that helps you find where to take your waste. So if you've got an unusual waste or a new waste on site, you can just type in the type of waste and it gives you all the places that can take it. So it's those sorts of things is what I've been involved in. And I think if you make things easy to use and look at it from a user point of view,
then they're generally more readily embraced.
Okay. So one last final comment from each of you really is, where do we go from here? We've identified the problem. We know that digital has its benefits. We know there's problems around, what we call it and what it is. Do we overuse the word BIM? Do we mix up digital and modern methods of construction too often? And people think, well, I don't do modern methods of construction, so digital's not for me. The recovery plan talks about industry and government helping to push it forward, but where's the help going to come from? Is it companies themselves, or is there some organisations that could drive this forward? So we wanted to start with Saffron. What would be your one message to make this happen in the reality?
I'd say it's the practicalities of making the support available in a way that suits SMEs. So, they might not be available to attend training courses, at the set time. So why not make support available on evenings and weekends, and make it in rather than being, these are the digital tools available, or this is what you can do, a kind of problem-focused coaching approach to say, well, what are the challenges you face? It's a business growth and development coaching really, and chances are that whatever the solution will be just happens to be a digital solution. So I think it's about I don't know if it's whether main contractors can create some kind of coherent support for their ecosystem of supply chain, or whether it's, the obvious answer would be CITV, etc. But we know that that's kind of taken a nosedive, that funding at the moment. So, I think whatever help is available, I agree with Vince, the desire is there, but it's making it accessible in the way that suits SMEs.
Vance?
I think I'd pick up on the two things that Safs said, and also what Andrew said, in the sense that if we're only talking about SMEs, the coaching idea is good. But for instance, you did some work with the Gloucestershire Training Group where you did the digital experience, or you opened, I would say, you had an event that opened people's eyes. So picking up on what Andrew said, you don't know what you don't know. So those sort of things I think are really good, but I don't know how you drag people into a room. It's almost like, if anyone had said to me that I'm using Word 25 years ago, I probably would have laughed and pointed at my mum's typewriter. But in actual fact, it's an everyday piece of software which we all know, recognise, and probably couldn't do without these days. Having said that, if you never knew it existed, how do you get that over to people? So what I would reinforce what Saf said and what Andrew's already said. It's finding a way of showing people what they don't know, and I would include myself in that.
And Andrew, is there a role for CE here? And
certainly a role that CE could and should play. And as you know, we've got a thought leadership group dealing with digital and off-site technologies. However, going back to your question, in terms of getting this across, I think we make the mistake, and having chaired BIM for Housing for 4 out of 6 years, it's full of, if I'm not being rude, but full of anoraks. People that are interested in the technology, which really most people are not. It's really about what's in it for me. So if you're going to sell this in inverted commas, you've got to sell the productivity, efficiency benefits, and dare I say it, the profitability benefits that this can have on your business. And that's what will encourage people into the room to listen, because they want to make their business more profitable, more productive. They're not really interested in technology. Why would they be, unless you're an anorak, without putting it bluntly? So for me, it's taking the language away from calling it BIM or calling it digital or whatever, and blockchain and all these things. Let's talk about productivity and profitability, because that's what people are interested in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a big thumbs up for that, Andrew. Final comment from Jane?
Yeah, I think just building on what Andrew said there, I mean, one of the roles that I've kind of accidentally found myself in is a middle person between these tech companies that are talking about blockchain and so on, and applying that technology to environmental situations. So that I'm the one that's sort of saying, right, well, this is what it can do for you, and almost shielding the customer from the technology people that get really excited about things like machine learning. And I'm the one saying, well, actually, this will make you easier to find sites that can take your waste. It'll make it easier to work out how much carbon you're producing without having to add all these little bits and pieces up. You just stick what it is in this program and it churns out a result. They don't really care that it uses machine learning or any sort of algorithm or whatever. They just want the end result and to work out. I mean, for example, within the construction sector, there's been quite a lot of work done with predicted waste collections on construction sites. So companies have taken all the data everywhere from all sorts of different projects in the world, and then they say, well, this is a similar project. What are my expected waste arisings? And rather than having a weekly collection, it'll be like, well, that bin is only likely to need collecting once a month. So then they're reducing the carbon footprint by reducing the amount of pickups, and they're not collecting empty bins. So there's all sorts of things like that that machine learning's been used for. So I think it's that translation element from what Andrew was saying, where it needs somebody that's the technical person or the environmental person or the construction engineer that can hook up with the programmers to make sure that those programs do what you want them to do, and to sort of avoid getting too bogged down in exactly what technology is being employed, but to look at the end result and what it can achieve. And that sort of middle person, like a translator almost, is kind of where I found myself in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I think it's looking at what it can do for you rather than calling it these like digital sounding terms that are a bit off-putting. The other thing I was going to say as well is often the tech companies, to hear directly from them, obviously in the right language, marketing is expensive. You know, going to events is expensive. And a lot of people that are starting up in these sort of construction digital type companies are quite small. And in order to get off the ground and get the right people in the right place, there needs to be affordable solutions. I mean, I'm just a startup. I have done it once, but
Ooh. Sorry, I think we've lost Jane for a moment. Hopefully we'll have Jane back in a moment. And Jim has made a comment around asking younger people. What I'd like to do is unmute Jim when Jill comes back from her call and get your thoughts on that. Can we move on to modern methods of construction? It's getting an awful lot of press. I've been told it's the future. But again, it's a bit like digital, isn't it? It means so many different things to different people. I think many people will think it's a large pre-completed pod that's dropped onto a site. It's all finished. You move in and 10 minutes later. Other people, it's fly-in factories. Other people, it's components. Andrew, would you like to kick off? You know, is modern methods of construction the future?
Well, I've been involved with MMC for about 20 years. I set up a light gauge steel modern method panel system 20 years ago when I was working with Forticrete in Ibstock. And to be honest with you, the real problem with MMC was overcoming the cultural issue. Well, we've always done it this way. We've always built brick on brick, block on block. When you actually analyze the benefits of MMC, it's a no-brainer, because you get better quality, you get better health and safety, less defects, it's quicker, and so on and so on. So the benefits of MMC have been there for people to see. The real issue we've had is one of culture. I have to say, for the first time in my 40 plus years now in construction, I have never seen such uniformity in terms of accepting MMC as the way forward, for all sorts of reasons. And you go right from government down through stakeholders, through clients, and now the supply chain, major contractors, designers, and so on, that we need to look at MMC. In terms of your opening gambit, Gerard, Gerald. I think we all need to be consistent in our terminology. And for me, what we should be using is Mark Farmer's 7 definitions of MMC. So the volumetric that you talk about, for example, is category 1. Most of my members in the Structural Timber Association, it's a panelised system, which is category 2, and so on. So I think we need to be consistent in our terminology. I believe that everyone is now witnessing the beginning of the massive change that we've been looking to achieve in how we build things for all sorts of reasons. The skills shortages of traditional labour, the fact that, you know, the average bricklayer is now 55 years old and this sort of thing. The fact that young people no longer want to work on wet and windy building sites, less and less young people wanting to go into that line as a trade. So moving towards, you know, the more we can build in the factory. We've got something called pre-manufactured value now, haven't we? Which is how Homes England is measuring whether to fund a project or not. And that is measured by how much work is actually done in the factory before we go to site. So we've got the government now saying that any public building has to be, you know, MMC has to be considered first. So the direction of travel now for me is unstoppable, and I think it's long overdue, and I think it's really exciting. This is the real catalyst for change, Joel, in my view. We're at last going to see the UK construction industry enter the 21st century.
Mm. And I think what always struck me was many years ago as a site manager, freezing cold site, wind was blowing through this block of houses, you know, everybody was blue with cold, and the carpenter was trying to hang the doors, and he undid the lock to change the hand of it, which he did. You know, all locks come same hand, so you take it apart, and the little screw popped out, and he found it to put it back in, and his hands were so cold, so blue, that he really struggled to do it. And I thought, well, crazy industry, you know, what? One, why didn't he go into a cantina somewhere warm to do it? But 2, why do we do those sort of things in the factory, in the wet and the cold? And why can't we have those things pre-made and ready just to hang into position? So, you know, there's a much more smaller scale of modern methods, but we do need to change. What's the contractor's view, Vance? I know your work is slightly different, but are you seeing more components, or do you see this change coming?
I don't see it day to day. I hope Andrew's right to a degree, because I think the country, the population, the language Andrew used about the direction of travel, I think is fairly obvious. We need to use a local term, pull your finger out and get on with it. And expecting things to be built in the middle of winter is probably not the best way forward. Having said that, you know, the market is vast. You know, Andrew's talking about structural timber and panel systems and what have you, but you know, the greater part of our housing stock was built before 1950, which we built out of blocking bricks and sand and cement and all the things that you know, we're basically saying we're moving away from. So, you know, when you look at digital, you know, it's, you know, it can hit many targets. And as I've said already, your average contractor is quite open-minded, but he will be pound led. You know, it'll simply be a commercial thing. If he can see that by using a piece of tech, which might be as simple as, I'm not sure who said Jane or Saf or one of the other speakers said about the tech being used to determine waste disposal. Well, you know, waste disposals, you know, as far as most contractors are concerned, it's in a skip. The splitting up of materials doesn't occur to them because the market they're working in, there's no financial advantage to them. But if there was a financial advantage and there was an app, for instance, that said, you know, someone was going to collect in Arco on a particular day, they might buy into that because they would see the financial advantage. Sorry, it sounds so sad to just talk about cash, but yeah, unfortunately in the contracting world, You know, it's not house building. It's not mass.
RLB, the QSs, you know, Riley Levitt Bucknell, have done an independent cost comparison, brick and block versus timber frame, and actually the timber frame comes out 1% cheaper. So, and obviously as it's independent, we're backing that.
Not surprisingly.
But so if you actually analyse it, you know, apples with apples, there is a cost comparison. The real obstacle is cultural. The real obstacle is, well, we've always done it this way and we don't want to change. That's the real obstacle.
Yeah. And is it also the end user of the building? You know, timber frame took a hammering, you know, after those old enough to remember Panorama and the hammering.
No, it was World in Action. World in Action, wasn't it?
World in Action, was it?
Barracks in 82.
Yeah, I was building a timber frame site at the time, so I had everybody crawling over it for days. Is it end user resistant, or is it client? You know, the people having the buildings.
Most end users, to be honest, don't even ask what their house is built of. Very, very few. If you ask your Barretts and Persimmon, Taylor Wimpey, it's down to the bathroom, you know, the kitchen, the curb appeal, the same old, same old. But you do get people like housing associations who are keen on things like timber frame simply because of the energy efficiency.
And are there 7 definitions or categories of modern methods of construction? Are they well enough known? Do we need to do more to explain what we mean by MMC? We
should really. I mean, they're relatively new, aren't they? When did Mark launch them? Over a year ago now? Just over a year ago, was it?
Yeah.
It was the end of 18, so they've been around a year and a half. Probably not well enough known, but my hope is that we have some consistency in construction, because we're famous for reinventing things, aren't we? Going off and doing our own thing.
Yeah.
There are these 7 definitions available now. I would request that we all use them.
Yeah. And Jane, is there, I'm not sure if you know there's any links between the environmental benefits of the modern methods of construction over some of our more traditional ways. Is that something that you've looked at all?
No, not in any real depth, I'll be honest. I know that there's obviously environment, there's been a number of initiatives to improve the environmental credentials under modern construction, but no, I've not really been involved with that directly.
Yeah, okay. And Saffron, what's the situation in Scotland? You're seeing more, I heard once there was more timber frame, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
3 out of 4 houses are built in timber frame in Scotland.
Quick plug for the Timber Association, go on then. Yeah, Saffron?
I haven't got the statistics of Scotland to hand, but I do know that Construction Scotland Innovation Centre have recently launched off-site ready. And this is the thing that the kind of the nub of the issue really is that once you get to actually building the things on site, it's too late. There's no point in promoting the benefits of this to a contractor who's been given the plans to build something. You know, what we need to do is make sure that the contractors, the people who are building it, will have the skills to do that when that design comes in their direction, and that they have the confidence and the capability to tender for jobs that involve that. So that's not that they're on the receiving end of it, basically. You know, so they can equip themselves ready, but it's really a design issue.
Yeah. Good. Well, it'd be interesting to see what modern methods of construction we see at the Cyber Park. You imagine with some futuristic buildings being planned that we will see it. The other thing that is hot on the idea of modernising the sector is carbon, zero carbon. It's not an area of my expertise at all, and I dread to think of some of the leaky buildings that I was constructed, some of the detailing around lintels and windows, and they must have leaked heat considerably. But there's 2 sides to this in a new development. You've got during the construction phase, and then you've got the performance of the building itself. So if we look at construction and we look at the phase of it, I wonder if Jane's got some thoughts about observations of what you see during the construction phase, and what's the reality on the ground of how contractors look after waste, what they generate, how they look after it, how they dispose of it?
What I've generally found is that they set out great intentions in order to get through the planning process. So they're required to do a waste plan of what happens, what type of waste generated, where does it go, and so on. For larger designs as well, they need to look at carbon analysis of that, including vehicle routes and so on. What I tend to find when I've done audits on the ground is that the plan may say we're going to source segregate our wastes, we're going to recycle everything that can be recycled, and then what happens is actually that was never designed into the process in the first place. So I was on a housing development recently where the footprint was so squeezed in order to put as many houses as possible on that the site office had to relocate to one of the garages of a house that hadn't yet been sold, which meant the thought of putting on 5 or 6 skips in order to source segregate the waste was just never going to happen. But it actually cost them a fortune because they were having to get their one tiny skip collected many times a day. Recycling absolutely nothing. I mean, there was everything from crisp packets to bits of cement that were clinging to anything that could have been recycled, which rendered the whole lot contaminated. So even though probably 90% of what was in the skip could be recycled, it was so plastered in bits of concrete that they'd emptied out of mortar tubs that there's nothing, that would end up in a landfill for sure, or at best incineration. But yeah, it's really, really different what goes into the plans, and despite a huge amount of expense going into the plans to actually what we found on the ground, mostly due to space constraints. And it's not the fault of the guys on the site at all. If they're only given one skip, of course they're going to chuck everything into it. It's that joined up approach of looking at the site waste management plan rather than just giving it to a consultant like me to get them something that can get through planning, to actually incorporate it into the site plans and the working documents and have someone oversee that whole approach. But they just set themselves up to fail because towards the last phase of the job, and the last phase is still about 60 houses, they had absolutely no space on site. So yeah, there is something I see quite a lot. Of the 7 sites that I visited recently as part of one project, none of them were segregating their waste, despite saying they would in their plan, which is a bit sad really in this day and age.
Yeah. And what's the contractor's view, Vance? Is it education on site? Is it commercial pressures? Is it lack of space?
I think, picking up again on what Jen said, the problem you have is that if you've got a small site, as has been easily demonstrated there, they are just going to pick the easiest option. So if it's not planned in, it just won't happen, as simple as that. And even if it is planned in, then other pressures come to bear, as simple as where do you put 3 skips, 2 skips, 1 skip? Is there a good system for collecting, I don't know, plasterboard? Is there a source for use softwood, something like that? So most contractors, I don't sense a automatic position of we'll just put it in the skip. Most of the ones that I spend any time with recognise that there is value by splitting loads and what have you. But if you're talking about the smaller contractor, like I've said it before, it just comes into that financial bracket of what works for me financially. Although I would say there is a growing insistence or debate taking place with clients, domestic clients, who are saying, where's that going? And I sense that's coming, believe it or not, from schools. I think children are way more aware than we give them credit for recognising what is a good and a bad thing to be doing. And they'll ask their parents, and their parents will ask their builder. Whether they get an honest answer is another thing altogether. But in essence, most contractors are open-minded and are prepared to do the right thing. They're not all fly tipping every night, But I do, the scenario that was mentioned a moment ago about a plan for 10 skips and in reality just 1 in a bonfire around the corner, that is still the modus operandi for most builders put in that position.
Yeah, it is sad, yeah. I was just going to say, sorry, just following on from that, is the next generation I do think really are the key to this, and the sort of pester power that you get from the kids. And there's actually some fairly targeted approaches taken by some big companies to engage in the next generation. to make sure that they pester their parents to do the right thing. You know, you get little kids kind of like, "Mummy, put that plastic in the glass box." And like, that is definitely going to be the future. I did a STEM talk recently at my kids' school to year 2s, and I was all ready to just be like, right, let's have a race and put the cycling in the right boxes. That was way too basic for them. They started a debate with me, year 2s, so this is 6 and 7-year-old kids, about incineration versus landfill and what was the best environmental option. I was absolutely blown away. And I kind of just put what I planned in the bin, but they were totally engaged in it. They had real opinions on it, about the dirty air and about shoving stuff in a hole in the ground and all that kind of thing. It was fantastic. They're so much better informed than some adults that are, sadly. But yeah, I totally agree. The next generation really are key.
Yeah. And Andrew, with your various hats, is what's happening with waste control? Are you seeing more initiatives coming on board?
I mean, to be honest with you, it's not an area of expertise, but I would, if we could, Gerald, just like to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. Because when we talk about zero carbon, actually, the one issue that I'm dealing with hugely is embodied carbon in terms of the building materials that we specify and use. So in France, for example, the French government, as from next year, are saying that they have to use in public buildings a minimum of 50% timber because of the embodied carbon in concrete and steel. And it's those sorts of issues that I'm dealing with. So I'm not, if I'm honest with you, Joe, I'm not dealing with site waste and things like that as an issue, either within CE or within the Structural Timber Association. Whether I should or not, I don't know. So I don't think I've got too much to bring to the party with that discussion. But I do believe the choice of building materials that we use, moving away from concrete, away from steel because of embodied carbon, moving away from plastic for the reasons that we know well. I think that's the sort of decision making that has to happen right up front in design.
Yeah. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's not just the wastage and the embodied carbon, but it's the link between the digital adoption and wastage and efficiency. It's, again, I think it needs to be reframed in the context of profitability and productivity, and you're not losing one at the expense of the other. One can drive the other. You know, when you're talking about zero carbon and sustainability, I just don't think these are words that are going to, catch on to the SME, because it's not going to give them a direct benefit.
No, I mean, the benefit that we promote within our sector is around energy efficiency. So, self-builders, for example, 3 out of 4 self-builders go down the timber frame route because of the improved energy efficiency. So they know that a timber frame home is going to cost them £1 or 2 a week to run in energy. So why wouldn't you want to look at that as an opportunity, which is the similar reason why housing associations do the same thing. But of course, when you're in the private development, the house builders just want to build them, stack them high, sell them and move on. They're not really interested in the asset moving forward. So it really depends where your audience is, doesn't it? But I agree with you. I'm in every topic. We've got to move away from the title of the topic, and we've got to get into the zone of what would make people interested. It is around profit. It is around productivity. You made the point, Vance. Whether you like it or not, if there's no business benefit, it won't happen.
Yeah, and the lifetime of the building, and not just the cost of construction.
Yes.
That thing. And Vance, from your remedial work you're doing in flood damaged buildings, is it replacing things like for like, or do you introduce new levels of insulation and heat loss and different materials, or how does it work in that sector?
Well, a couple of things to pick up on there. Obviously, an insurance company is not the most benevolent of bodies. They're not always. I'm just looking at Jim there, nodding away. their position will be you can have back what you had before. That has been slightly in the Gloucestershire area, and sorry I'm sounding so parochial for you further away, but we had some major flooding in 07-08, and the local authorities took a bit of an interest there, and as a result of the flood repairs, enhanced insulation levels were adopted, by no means to the same level of thermal requirements that we're working on for new build, but it was a step forward. I would repeat what I've said earlier about clients. If their building is basically had all the plaster removed, then it's quite common now for a well-informed client to say, can we do something a little bit more with the walls? So that's happening. But in general, it comes down to that giant pound sign again. And the only other thing I would say is on the more recent work we've done in the flooding in the Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, Worcestershire area, the works that have been done prior to us getting onto site on existing buildings, there's a degree of resilience been built in. So instead of hacking the walls off every single time, instead of scrapping every door every single time, removing skirtings, etc., the industry as a whole is moving towards a more resilient form of rebuild to give the building a chance should the same thing occur. It's not 100% successful, but it's wholly better than where we were, what was that, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's really useful. If we could move on to the last topic now around skills. And I'm talking about skills for these new ways of working. So whether it's digital, whether it's carbon, whether it's MSC. And I just wonder whether the old traditional model that we have in construction, everything's a course, perhaps doesn't work in this situation, because somebody's got to develop a framework or a standard. Somebody's got to develop content. Somebody's got to take the risk of putting that course on, and people want to go and buy it and attend. And there's so many barriers away that a contractor says, well, it's not really for me. A college or training provider says, I haven't really got the confidence I'm going to get my money back. And should we look at other ways? I think some of the work that you've done around webinars that you've been running is a great educational tool. I think some of the work that Saffron's doing with digital and the CITV. So perhaps a comment each about how do we get the message over? And I'll open up to Jane, second Jane and Jim as well about their thoughts. How do we get the message over? Perhaps a different way. You know, do we build communities of practice? Do we have other ways of pushing the message out in a language that people understand, and not think, oh, we need a course that nobody wants to develop or attend because of the risk involved in it? Sorry, that was a long introduction to a short question. Should we start with Saffron?
What the message to whom? Sorry, Gerald. What?
How do we democratise this knowledge, this training? A course is not always the right answer, because who's going to develop it?
How do we transfer the knowledge? So again, there's lots of different angles to look at this. One thing that I've been involved in recently is future skills. And I think there's an acknowledgement that meta skills and competencies are critical here. So it's not just about having a skill in a particular, one particular software or one particular method of construction, but about having a desire to learn, knowing how to go about assessing different options, how to pick up new skills quickly. So yeah, I think it's a higher level thing there. Again, making it accessible in different formats. The digitising knowledge, in the future, a person being a gatekeeper to a certain bit of knowledge isn't going to exist anymore, because there'll be so many different digitised ways to get your head around things, and even to learn practical skills.
Thank you. And Vance, what would help a typical SME is it a course that you want, or would other chunks of knowledge be more beneficial?
I think depending on the individual themselves, to be perfectly honest with you, if they're earning good money, doing what they always do, then dragging them away from it's always going to be difficult. Having said that, there are quite a few initiatives. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's Taunton or possibly Exeter Way, where is it the green environment, or there's a college which has got some working areas to demonstrate, for instance, adding thermal layers to buildings. And I thought that had value. I thought it was a good way of getting to the smaller contractor to recognise that his skills, which he thinks of as traditional, can actually be, reworked in a different way. But again, it comes down to the motivators. Like I say, I don't sense any resistance to it. It's more a case of what works for them on a financial level. And I'm sorry I keep coming back to that numbers game, but unfortunately that's where the smaller contractor is, I'm afraid.
Okay. Jill, would you mind unmuting Jim for me, please? If Jim doesn't mind being unmuted, that is. You've made a comment in the Q&A about companies approaching younger members of staff to help with modernising their businesses. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that conversation?
It actually came from the education sector, but I think it works equally well in construction, where you've got leaders and senior managers in a business who, as Vance has rightly said, will carry on doing what they've always done and their experience, and they're used to telling people what to do. These days, so it was revealed through COVID, we're all on Zoom because we had to. And if there is a drive from younger people that come onto site who want to work in a different way, there should be a culture whereby they're able to tell their bosses a better way of doing things. That's the only way we learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Oh, Jim. Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, sorry. I'm just checking you hadn't frozen them in. Really interesting about using youth, and certainly we've heard that around the environment. Andrew, I think what you've been doing recently with CE with the different podcasts, the publications. We need to get hands on the drone publications just come out. All those things add to the mix. Do you see all that continuing?
Yeah, very, very much so. I don't think we're going to move away from a situation whereby people within the industry have to have some sort of certification to say they can do what they say they can do. And there needs to be some audit process in place to ensure that's the case. And in fact, to be honest, post Grenfell and post Hackett, I think that interrogation and audit trail of people's skills is going to be more onerous. And I think that's quite right. And earlier in the conversation, I can't remember who it was, I think it was Vance, mentioned about insurers. And I think insurance policies over the coming months and years are going to be far more intent in checking quality assurance and compliance of people. So I don't think we're going to move away, if I'm honest, from the need to have courses. What does worry me is one of the webinars that we carried out a few weeks ago with a college who will be nameless, when we were talking about the flexibility of the previous topics of digitalization and MMC and zero carbon and so on, and whether they had the courses that would deliver the needs of the current construction industry, I was rather worried to hear that the answers were not, that they were still intent on delivering the same courses that they'd been delivering over very many years. I think the construction industry is moving at a huge pace, and I'm worried that the training facilities are not keeping up with our needs. I don't know whether that answers your question, but that's a real fear that I have at the moment.
No, it's really interesting. Thank you for that, Andrew. I must admit I hadn't thought so much about the audit trail. I just see there's so many opportunities to pass knowledge on in other ways, with technology and other formats.
I think that's a separate issue, and I think what we're doing with the webinars and the online documents, and that's great. And personal CTD is important. But what I'm saying is, I think particularly post Grenfell, post Hackett, that you're going to have some sort of audit trail and an acknowledgement. It's not good enough just to say, I'm an expert in my field. I've been doing this for 20 years. It's not good enough. There needs to be a quality assured system.
Yeah. I wonder whether Jane Ballon, would you like to say something? You've made a comment about language, which you've been very patiently listening to us. Would you like to make some comments about perhaps our way forward and how we explain things?
I think this partly picks up on something Andrew and Vance were both saying, which is about when we communicate with people, it's really important we communicate in their language and not ours. And we've sat here discussing a variety of acronyms and different things like BIM and MMC and this sort of thing. And for quite a lot of people, that's kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A dark art. What are you talking about? What does it mean? And what I think there needs to be a way of getting the messages across that really brings it home to people in a much more simplified way, basically speaking in their terms, especially for smaller organisations where these things are not quite so visibly being utilised. People are probably using it, don't even know they're doing it. Do you know what I mean? And I think part of that, but I also think there's a thing about the concern about the lack of training thing really kicked in with me, because one of the things my company does focus on organisations developing, paying their people to do the right things. And one of the issues with the construction sector is paying people to do the right things instead of penalising them for doing the wrong things. And it's much easier to penalise the stick than it is to pay. And so, it's quite difficult for people to really get their head around and change that cultural change. I think Jim mentioned the cultural change of moving people to think differently about how they do things. And as Saffron said, if you can get people thinking differently, then and using technology and things in a different way, you can build skills, you can build people's earning capability as well, and you can build diversity in the sector as well. There's so much that could be done if we could get back into the language of the people who are actually doing it now and bring them forward to think about how they can use it to their benefit. But it's getting them to think about it in the first place and not to walk away from it because they don't understand the terminology.
Thank you for your contribution. It's really interesting to have another view from somebody who's been listening to us. And Jane, as well as your environmental audits and what you've been doing, you also deliver environmental training. So how do you see that developing in the future?
Well, my beef, if you like, with training within the environmental sector is so much of it is still delivered face-to-face. And it's just getting harder and harder to take staff offline in order to do that. And often they'll train an environmental manager or a representative on site, but actually it's the people doing the job day in, day out that potentially have the most responsibility in terms of how to protect the environment. So a lot of my training is geared towards maybe team leaders in order to pass that down to their staff or the actual core staff themselves. And in order to do that, I think you just have to accept that an organisation is unlikely to take all of its frontline workers off for any length of time to do any training. So that's where the digital training comes in. I don't think it's the answer to everything, but I think it really has its place among a suite of learning options. And I think people now are so used to having their news delivered on their phone in bite-sized chunks and so on, that a lot of people have really lost that ability to retain large amounts of knowledge. So it's breaking everything down into readable chunks, and exactly as Jane and Ballon was saying, talking in their language. So making sure that really key concepts are explained in a way that's understandable. I mean, the construction industry, much like the waste sector, has also got a lot of people where English isn't their first language. So to then try and understand all of the technical terms as well that engulf our industries is also really difficult. So it's not a case of in any way dumbing down, that isn't the way that it should be done, but just explaining things in a language or in a certain way that's more accessible to everybody that's likely to need the course. And to really sort of get into how people learn and how best to disseminate the information. And I think what firms will end up with certain individuals that are representatives that really need a degree or higher in environmental or whatever. And then to make sure that, and this is my personal view, is that everybody has some environmental training under their belt so that they understand really key concepts like what their actions do impact the environment as a sort of source, pathway, receptor type model. And that's why health and safety training has been really successful, getting people to do a mental risk assessment in everything that they do. And I sort of want to apply that thinking to environmental training, but in bite-sized chunks so that they don't have to sit in front of a computer, because nobody wants to do that for 2 hours and click through screens. So that they can do it in a sort of Duolingo kind of a way where they do a few minutes, 10 minutes here and there, can be done on their phones, because they might not all even have a PC as part of their, or a laptop as part of their daily work. But to just really look at how to best get that information across. So that's really what I'm looking at, is to really break it down and look at how can we bring this knowledge to people in the most easily accessible way. And by accessible, I mean in both sense of the words, physically have the tools to learn on, but also accessible so that it's an equal level playing field for people who maybe didn't do so well at school or haven't got the confidence to think that they can do these sorts of things.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank anybody. Has anybody got any final comments they wish to make before I wrap up? Oh, so you're on silent, Saffron.
I know I'm not meant to be the one asking the questions, Gerald, but I would just be interested to know from Jim, what is the relationship between training and insurance costs?
Yeah.
Can you tangibly bring down your insurance costs by showing that you've rolled out the right level of training in everything, health and safety, digital skills, environmental skills?
Quality standards in all training areas are really important. Our insurance game is much like the housing game. You want to make somebody want to buy you product and put it in the best light. So businesses that are taking that sort of thing responsibly, they will inevitably have a better claims experience and they become a more attractive risk to the insurers. Actually quantifying that is difficult, but it paints a picture of a responsible firm that insurers might want to sort of sharpen the pencil and give a better deal to than somebody who hasn't done all that stuff. We're about to go into a harder market now where premium rates will start to rise a little bit, and the clients that are taking control of those efforts and making themselves a better risk will feel the pain less than those that aren't. Yeah.
And what about because I've heard of insurance companies who they don't give a reduction for using a certain software, but they give a certain software away free with the construction companies that insure them, because they know that that will make them less likely to make a claim.
Yeah,
they're working more efficiently. So is there a link between digitalization and insurance?
Very much so. I mean, some of the stuff that Jane was talking about in terms of modular training, they will downstream some of that health and safety stuff. And help maybe the smaller employers, the SMEs of the world, actually manage that sort of thing rather in a similar way that big contractors will do. And they can track how many people have taken up the training modules and almost follow that through in terms of the performance of the insurance as a result. I think it's interesting that the whole subject here has been very, very reflective for me about a few things. Modern materials, if I think about 30 years ago when we started putting composite panels into commercial buildings, there was the problem at Hereford Farmers where firemen sadly lost their life, and insurers wouldn't touch composite panels in the early days when they had polystyrene infills and stuff. These days with modern rock wool, they're perfectly happy with it. It's as safe from a fire perspective as bricks or blocks, and that's changed in one generation. Similarly, employers' liability, building sites were so dangerous, people were getting hurt and killed on a frequent basis. The HSE basically jumped on it and said, you've got to do it. And of course, most employers realised that not hurting or killing people was a good idea and brought it into part of their DNA. That's now how they operate. In the early days, I'm sure Vance was pulling his hair out about health and safety. It was a right pain in the backside, but it's just what you do now. And I'd quite happily walk onto a building site if allowed, whereas 20 years ago I wouldn't have even dreamed of it. And it just becomes part of your way of doing things. So I think you'll get there with the modern methods of construction. I think it's definitely, there's an economic argument. I buy all that from Vance. And then there's what do the customers want.
Well, thank you for that, Jim, and thank you to Jill for looking after the technical aspects and keeping us all on screen. And thank you to Saffron from Scotland. I hope to stop raining. To Vance and to Andrew and to Jane, and also to Jane and Jim as well for contributing. Very much appreciated, and hopefully we can revisit this again in November. And I've learnt a lot really around language. We really got to have a language that everybody can understand and take forward. So thank you all very much for your valuable contributions, and we look forward to catching up again.
And do check out what else is on over the show for the next 2 days, because there's quite a lot happening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.